My name is Linda McLaughlin, and I was born in 1941 in Montreal. I moved to Ontario after I finished university, and that would have been in, oh dear me, 1962. I worked at the Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto as a lab technician, and I then worked at the Addiction Research Foundation. I was their very first lab technician. It was also in Toronto, and I was actually very fortunate at the time because as they were growing, they decided to build a new small hospital specifically to treat alcoholism and drug addiction. And I got to plan out how the lab would work. And I really enjoyed that part. And then we hired other technicians and what have you, and turned into quite a interesting job. Because we were small, you're required to do many things that you wouldn't necessarily do in a larger facility. And one of those things was to, visit the patients, to take blood from them and talk with them. And, I did enjoy that very much. Met many famous people there who were suffering from either, drug abuse or alcohol abuse. And they were very, very friendly. And, often if there was an author there and I had read the book, he would talk about the book. And it was very enjoyable. I learned a lot. I moved to the Lindsay area, specifically to Janetville, after my second child was born. And that would have been around 1972, 73. I'm not quite sure just when I did move there. And we had a cottage at Viewlake, and we had it made into a home. And then we lived in it for quite a number of years. I had two other children, both of whom were born at Ross Memorial Hospital. Now, all of my children went to school at Grandview Public School, and then to LCVI. And then they went on to university, and I'm very fortunate that they're very fortunate too, that like myself, they were able to attend university. And now they all are adults, and they have their own lives, and two of them live in Ottawa, and two of them live in Lindsay. And I'm very fortunate that the two who live in Lindsay are the two who have children. So my grandchildren live in Lindsay. Okay, while I lived in Manvers Township, I was involved in a number of things. I did coach baseball, and thoroughly enjoyed that for a number of years. I was instrumental in getting the nursery school in Janetville started. There were a group of us, and we thought we had a need to have a nursery school. Not necessarily that the mothers who were involved, not that they didn't work, they were at home, but they just felt it was good for the children to be able to get together and have a experience of a different atmosphere. And so we worked on that for a while, and we were able to get it started, and it continued for a number of years. Two of my children did attend, and they thoroughly enjoyed it. I recall one day I forgot to pick up my daughter. And they waited, and there was no phone at the Janetville Community Center at the time. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, oh my goodness, I better go and get her. And the teacher was not upset, but I apologized profusely. Anyway, it continued for a number of years, and I'm not sure just when it stopped. I was also involved in scouting in Janetville. A person who became my best friend, Mary Lou, she was involved in scouting, and they needed someone to be the treasurer for the Janetville group, and I took on that job. I never worked as a leader. That was, no, thank you. However, I used to go to camp with them. At any camp they went to, I always went, and I was the cook. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed the children, and you know, sometimes my oldest son was in scouting, and he was one of those young people, you know, he read all the time, and he used to trip out of his tent every day with book in hand and eyes down on the book, not on the ground. And anyway, it was a fun time, and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think I was with them for about 10 or 12 years. Can't quite remember, but a long time. Saw many children go through there, and you know, watched them as they grew, and a lot of them went on to be, you know, to be scouts, and they thoroughly enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, my son, my oldest son, who started scouting in Janetville, he ended up working for Scouts Canada in Ottawa. He became editor of their magazine, and stayed there for quite a few years and took on other jobs. What else? Oh, I also became involved in the starting of the Manvers Figure Skating Club, which my two girls participated in. And I was also on Manvers Council for, I think it was a 2-year term, I can't quite recall. Really surprised me, being that I was an outsider and still considered to be an outsider, even though I had lived there for a number of years. I was surprised that I actually did get elected. I can't say that I really enjoyed that time, but I do feel that I was instrumental in helping certain people achieve their goals by, you know, maybe perhaps being able to build a house that they wanted to build on part of a property their parents owned. And severances were hard to come by at that time. And I do feel that, you know, I was instrumental in helping them. And, you know, often when I see them, they still thank me. And I really appreciate that. What else? Oh, I also have been involved in the Janetville United Church as the treasurer for the pastoral charge, which included at the time the church in Yelverton and the one in Mount Horeb. The Yelverton church no longer exists, so it's just the two churches, and I'm still the treasurer. I only took it on for a couple of years, but it's been quite some time. I think I have it until I die. However, I do enjoy just the camaraderie of, you know, attending meetings, and you know, I'm not a regular attendee at the church service, but I do try and get there when I can. Especially since I live in Lindsay and I don't like driving in the winter that much. You know, I'm a summer person in terms of my attendance at church. When I first moved to Ontario, I wasn't quite old enough to vote yet. I think you had to be 21 at the time, and I wasn't. But I did work in an election. I volunteered. The candidate came to the door of the women's residence I lived in, and I happened to be standing there. And he was a New Democrat. He and his wife were both ministers. And unfortunately, I can't remember his name. However, he did win the election, and he sat in the Ontario legislature for some time. I stayed involved. Even after I moved to Janetville, there was a gentleman who lived there, and he was a New Democrat, and he didn't try, he came, he was looking for people to join and to take signs. It was an election time again. My husband and I both signed up as members of the New Democratic Party, and I'm very proud of that. But more importantly is the involvement. I think, and you know, I've tried to instill that in my children, to be involved in politics. It's not easy to instill in your children. it has to come from themselves, not from me. Some of them are somewhat involved, some of them aren't. So I'll just leave it at that and say that, you know, it's a very important thing to know, you know, what the policies of the various parties are before you vote. Not just you're going to vote for Joe Blow because you know Joe Blow, you know. Well, it might be better to vote for Jane Doe, you know, when maybe you should get to know Jane Doe. But, you know, it should always it should be a thoughtful process, not an automatic thing that you go and put your X beside this name. It should be a very thoughtful process about how we can make this a better place, how we can make not just Ontario or not just Lindsay or, you know, not just Kawartha Lakes a better place, but the entire province, the entire country a better place. And if we all vote more thoughtfully, that may happen. I have met some of the greatest people I know through my involvement in politics. For a period of time, I was on the Ontario New Democratic Party executive, and I represented this riding on that executive, and it was a great time. I really enjoyed it. After living in Janetville for, oh gosh, I can't think of how many years, but I moved to Lindsay. And I still had access to those groups that I had belonged to when I lived in Janetville. And I still do to this day. You know, I mean, I have my commitments. I am committed to the New Democratic Party. It's part of my philosophy of life. And, you know, I still belong there. The things like, I was also minor hockey. Minor hockey was a great thing, is still a great thing. I have 3 grandchildren who play minor hockey now. My 2 boys both played, not my 2, only one, sorry. Only one boy played hockey, but I was committed to that too. You need to commit yourself to any organization that you belong to or that your children belong to. And I always have. I was on the Manvers minor hockey executive for I don't know how many years. It was a long time, I know that. And I was very fortunate that I'm not a winter driver. I don't like driving in the winter at all. Well, it's okay as long as it's not snowing or icing. But, you know, there were always people around. They made sure that, you know, my son and I got to hockey if my husband wasn't around or available at the time to take him. So, and I feel that, you know, the service that I offered to minor hockey and also to Manvers Figure Skating, I was a treasurer for both organizations, and it was sometimes very difficult. You know, people are always handing you money here and there and whatever. You know, I had my left pocket was for hockey, my right pocket was for figure skating. That was my rule. And so I never got them mixed up. At least not to my knowledge, or anybody else's, but I don't think I did. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. Got to meet a lot of people I never would have met simply by being involved. And to this day I am involved. And I fully intend to stay involved in things until I die or am simply not able to participate.